Hello, welcome to our Core SIG meeting. I'm Łukasz, and today I'm going to be your moderator. And Mateusz, that has no better place to sit, so he's sitting on the street in Warsaw. He will be the guy that's helping me with taking notes. Before we start, remember about our rule. Add your name to the list of the attendees, so we know that you've been here, and we can share the info with others. Today's agenda is pretty full of different things, and there's a small change in the agenda on request done by Krzysztof. So we usually start the meeting with asking people that we see here for the first time how they're doing, for example. But we're not going to do it because Krzysiek has some other meeting, so he will actually be the first today to present during the meeting. And then I'm gonna go back to the agenda and handle the agenda and the rest of the meeting with you. So please don't feel disappointed. And Krzysiek, are you ready to present?
Yes, I am.
Okay, awesome. Then I'm stop sharing and please do.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
I can see, yeah, now I can see a console, yeah.
Okay, all right. So hello, my name is Krzysiek, and I want to show you today a new possibility, the possibility that is that emerged in Kyma in version 1.5. In the UI, you are able to manage the content of service catalog in a given namespace. For the purpose of this demo, I have here a Kyma runtime running on GKE cluster, and I have two namespaces here, the default one and my own use Redis here. So if I go to any of it and open the service catalog, I can see two service classes here. And if I go to the other one, I can see exactly the same service classes in the other one. And this is because currently on my runtime, I have a cluster-wide setup for the service catalog. And I have a cluster-wide add-on definition that defines a remote repository of add-ons, and those add-ons are then transformed by Helm broker and are available to the service catalog, and service catalog creates service classes for each namespace. Therefore, each namespace has exactly the same service classes. Now, with you would probably, as a cloud administrator, you would probably agree that it's not always wise to expose every resource everywhere in every namespace, especially if there's some cost related to consuming some services. So, in order to provide a better control over which service classes are available in which namespace, there is a new flow available that allows to create an add-on configuration in a given namespace. And then in this flow, Helm broker would identify that there is a new configuration for a given namespace and will fetch all the information about the add-ons and transform that into service classes in a given namespace. So let's see how does it work in action. Okay, so instead of simply adding more add-ons configurations to the cluster-wide add-ons, I would simply go inside my use Redis here namespace and choose add-ons navigation option here on the left. This is the brand new view that is now available in Kyma 1.5, and this allows me to create a new configuration just for my namespace. And for this demo, I will just take a testing bundle from a add-on repository, Kyma add-on repository. You copy this link. What's inside? It just defines two service classes: testing add-on and Redis service. So I'll use this URL and configure it here as a namespaced add-on configuration. Yeah, so what happens now is that I have a configuration just in this namespace, and additionally a new broker is available just in my namespace that is just publishing those two service classes definitions for the service catalog. And I would expect now, if I go to the catalog in my namespace, that I would have some additional classes. Yes, exactly those which are defined by the add-on which I added. So I can now use in-memory database Redis just in this namespace, and those service classes are not available in the other namespace. It still has the default set of service classes as defined by the cluster-wide configuration. So that was pretty much it from my side. Do you have any questions? There's a documentation about this flow. I will send it in the chat so you can read more technical stuff about how all this magic is happening.
My question from my side, curious. So did I say it right that, like in the diagram, the Helm broker creates a brand new instance of a service broker inside the namespace on a first add-on resource creation, right? So normally when you go to a brand new namespace, there's no broker in there. Okay.
Exactly.
Not basically, there is only one instance of service broker, and the Helm broker sits under Kyma system namespace, and we only adding new endpoints for serving additional service classes for given namespace. But there is only one application in your cluster.
Okay, so you're just creating a service broker resource.
Exactly.
Okay.
A new endpoint, and that's it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions to Krzysiu? Then thanks a lot, Krzysztof.
Maybe I will just mention that we plan to expose some new features on that view in the next release to provide better visibility about statuses of the add-ons, and also the option to refetch the configuration. So that will be presented probably in the next SIG core meeting as well.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you again, Krzysztof, and run.
Right. Enjoy the rest of the meeting. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Okay, I assume you can see the agenda back again. Okay, so next item of the agenda, questions and feedback. So we, if there's someone in the meeting that would like to ask a question before waiting till the end of the meeting, because you also have something like Krzysztof, and you would like to leave earlier. Any questions? No. Awesome. I can see that Ian, you joined. Then it's awesome. So enjoy the rest of the meeting. So the next items on the agenda will be quick intro to the release we did on Monday. Also, a bit. I'm gonna describe a bit a scope for the next release that we already. Yeah, we have the scope, so we can share some info about it. So something that will be released in next month. And then I will do a boring presentation about a documentation component that we did. And at the end, we're going to have Borja with topics around Terraform and provisioning of Kyma and Kubernetes clusters. So first is of course, the release. So let me simply go to the release notes. before I jump into the details of the release notes, information for you that on Monday we did release. On Tuesday, we also already made sure that Kyma 1.5 is available on Google Marketplace. So if you have a GCP account, you can much quicker provision Kyma to play with it through the Google Marketplace. Then if it comes to the scope of 1.5, what we delivered, the most important things I think to notice is that we, first of all, made sure that we are compatible with latest Kubernetes 1.15. But just bear in mind that because of the limitation on GKE and AKS that do not support such a high version of Kubernetes yet, we only have a automated testing on Kubernetes 1.13. Then if it comes to the important topics, we are super advanced with implementation of the of our API gateway to extend it with more functionality, especially OAuth 2 support. So it's already in the scope for 1.6 to complete the implementation. So it's going to be much easier and much nicer, more options simply we're going to have when exposing applications to the outside world. Console, no need to talk about it because you could see now a presentation from Krzysztof. So a namespace level add-ons configuration. Then we, in documentation, I think important is that we have some nice new tutorials for monitoring. In the service management, that's super interesting, especially that today Piotr, who is a product owner for service management in topic in Kyma, he's doing a presentation, actually, I think in half an hour on Helm Summit in Amsterdam, and he will probably announce what we are now simply announcing on the meeting. So the fact that we now officially maintain a Helm broker outside Kyma repository. So we will now officially always tell people that you can use Helm broker in other scenarios, not only in Kyma. Because we can see that it could live in the world of service catalog without Kyma, and we could attract more people to get contributions to the project. So that's super important to notice. Then for people that are super interested with the Knative, how we're going with the implementation, with this release in Kyma, hidden by the feature flag is a new experimental function controller that will be a replacement for our kubeless support for serverless in Kyma. So if you would like to see how it works, how it's consuming Knative build and Knative serving, please give it a try, enable it, and play with the controller and the function custom resource. And last but not least, we updated Istio. So for people that are concerned about security, please keep in mind that we have now a much newer version of Istio, which is solving many Istio security issues. And actually the same goes with our support for Kubernetes, because there were some major security issues with Kubernetes below version 1.13. So now you can easily use Kyma on latest versions. So that's if it comes to 1.5, what is done. And you can play with those features already. Important is also to know what's in 1.6, again, in 1 month. First item, so Terraform-based provisioning of Kubernetes clusters. We started an incubating project called Hydroform, that you can, you have a link in the meeting notes. You can check it out, what it is. But I think it's really interesting to see what direction we're taking with provisioning, that we want to basically Kyma CLI to support also provisioning of Kubernetes clusters using Terraform here. And then if it comes to Compass project, another incubating project we have in our Kyma incubator organization, we plan to have the provisioning of Kyma handled in the Compass as well with 1.6 release. And two more things, log UI. If you're a long Kyma user, you already know that log UI in Kyma is not the best one. We're getting a lot of feedback that the usability is not what developers expect, and there's a work plan to improve the UI. And last, I already mentioned when I was talking about 1.5 release, in 1.6 we want to complete the implementation of the API gateway to have a OAuth to support using the project from Ori called Hydra. Any questions before I jump into next item about 1.5 or 1.6? Okay, no questions. So more fun now, because I'm gonna do a presentation of my beloved documentation component. So I prepared a really boring presentation to do it, but I think it's I used this way of explaining what documentation component is and why it's important for you, because I think I owe you first of all a context why we created this component, because intentions were different for us and we have a different result. And I don't want to show you in action how the component works, because that's also not important. It's super easy React component. You should rather just notice that we simply have it open sourced, ready to use in any UI. And so for you, important is to know what it actually is. So first slide. If you're new to Kyma or even existing user, I think the basic understanding that you should have is that in Kyma, because we want to provide this extensibility of monoliths, and you can imagine, and they are sometimes implemented with different technologies, and then they expose APIs with using different specifications and standards. In Kyma, one of the rules we have is that we value specifications and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So in this simple picture, you can see on the left-hand side a group of monoliths that expose OpenAPI, OData, or Async API specs. And in the Kyma cluster, you can see something done with the Markdown specification. And also, if you could see on Krzysztof's presentation how he could show a service catalog, all those services like Azure Broker, etc. That's all powered by Open Service Broker API specification. So that's Kyma, right? So vision of Kyma is to support standards, don't reinvent. So as a result, what we have is, for example, here you can see a view of the documentation section in the console of the Kyma UI. So we can see that we, for example, provide a baked-in documentation for Kyma, so we don't have to search for information about Kyma on the internet. You get the docs for latest version of your cluster inside the console. We also have this contextual help. So, for example, when you could see on a presentation from Krzysiu, you could see that he's having some classes in the service catalog, and for example, there was this Azure Broker. So then user, when he's more interested with the service and he enters the service, he can see additional documentation that we show in the context of a given service. In this screenshot, you just see Markdown files rendered as a documentation, but you can imagine here that if it's a service that is exposing API or is sending events into the Kyma cluster, then you would see a tab with API console with events documentation rendered also in the context. And then if you know our Kyma project.io, we also render a lot of Markdown there. And it's a little bit differently styled. The navigation is a bit different, and the scope of functionality for rendering Markdown is smaller than the one we have in the catalog view in the console. So we can imagine that when we started Kyma and we started thinking about supporting all those specifications, then what we did first, we of course did the research. We found a perfect match for us for OpenAPI, which was Swagger UI. For Markdown, we found React Markdown, which was perfect. And for Async API, there was nothing on the on the market. So we basically wrote a new component from scratch and donated it to Async API organization. And for OData, the same. We had to write a component from scratch and keep it inside. But then if you could see, we have a console view, we have website repository with Kyma project.io. So as a result of reusing those components in different views, we had a lot of code duplication. Yeah, we had to implement things in a duplicated way in 2 different repos. So we basically were wasting a lot of time. So we decided to create this documentation component to get rid of all this code duplication to make maintenance easier. But as a result, what we noticed is that we created basically a generic component that can be used by anyone in any context not related to Kyma at all, just for rendering Markdown or APIs. API specifications. So here I'm just going to share you 2 links. First of all, to the documentation component repository. If you're interested with the subject of rendering different specifications, go there and see how the architecture looks like, because it's really flexible and gives you a lot of extensibility options with our plugin system. So then please do it and give us a nice star to the project, because we like them. And then in the presentation, you can see 2 links. I'm going to share the link to the presentation in the agenda. And I think the links I also provided already in the agenda. So you can see a sandbox project that I was creating some time ago, and tuned it up with Maciuś from my team today, because we released 0.2.0 release today with default styling. So we can see that basically the whole component, that's it. In this example, you can see that I'm having some mock data. So I have some mock Async API, mock Markdown, OData, and OpenAPI. And this part here below this line is everything handled by the component. Of course, here, for a sake of the sandbox, I create a simple navigation. So you can see Async API rendered, OData rendered, OpenAPI, and Markdown. And as I said, today we released 0.2.0, which means that we also include default CSSs based on SAP fundamentals. So you can imagine how you can see how easy it is, for example, to get rid of default styling. So here in the Markdown, you can see some nice panels, the copy button for the code snippets, but it's thanks to injecting our custom styles. If you just don't want to use them, you want to use yours, then the component will just give you a basic stuff that you can style on your own. So that would be it. Do you have any questions? But you're still there, right? I guess you are. Are you?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, damn, I was actually scared. So thank you. And now I will be quiet and let Borja to show his awesome stuff.
Okay. Thanks, Łukasz. Let me share my screen first of all. So I'm going to show a couple of things. The first one being the integration of the Kyma CLI with Terraform. For that, we built a concept based on Google Cloud Platform, which allows us to deploy Kubernetes clusters and specify them via the CLI, and then the implementation uses Terraform to create the cluster and manage it on GKE, on the Kubernetes engine. This is still under heavy development, so I'm just going to show the main feature of this, but it will probably change a bit from now to when it's done. So let's take a look. Basically, we have the Kyma CLI, so I'm going to go to the console. The Kyma CLI is basically the Kyma command, and for that we have a provision command that allows us to create clusters in different platforms. If we go to Kyma provision, we see, okay, we can send a cluster into Minikube, so local development, or create a cluster in GCP. This is the concept we just created. So let me check what GCP says. And here we have the options we can pass to the GCP cluster. So most of them I'm not going to give because they are already default values, such as the Kubernetes version and the machine type and region, but they are configurable. The important properties right now, first is the credentials file. This should be a JSON key from Google Cloud Platform for a service account with enough rights to create clusters. And secondly, the project, so in which Google project we want to create the cluster. So let's check. I have here my project, which is the Kyma project. We can see it in here and in the URL. And thus, I'm going to run the command as Kyma. Well, let me just provision GCP. So I need, first of all, my credentials, which conveniently is in my local directory, but it could be anywhere. And the second thing I need is the project name, which is, as we check in the URL, Kyma -project. So that's our project. So now when I run this, I should see a cluster. It's starting the provisioning. It will stay like this until the cluster is ready. And if we go back to the GCP and refresh, we should in short see a cluster with the name Terraform being created. There we have it. This is the cluster. It's created with the region we gave, the version we gave, the defaults, of course, and that's it. Once this cluster is finished, we can just use it. That's it, simple as that. We aim to have this for more providers, and the second one we have is still not integrated in the CLI itself, but we do have the Terraform integration for it, which is the Gardener provisioning. So for that, let me switch to the Gardener dashboard. This is my dashboard. And for that, we have a Terraform provider that will manage the creation, destruction, and status of the different resources. So I have a project called Borja, so my project. As you can see, I have no clusters on it right now. Here I can manage my keys. I have a key for Google Cloud Platform, which is this one. And these are my service accounts for Gardener. I have Botty, which is my admin bot and allows me to manage clusters on Gardener. These things are what I need to use the Gardener provider. So let's take a quick look at that. I have here my Terraform file for the Gardener provider. The first part is the provider itself. So my credentials, like in which profile do I want to create or manage clusters, which secret I want to use to access the underlying platform. And this kube path is the Gardener kube config. It corresponds to the configuration of the service bot, the Botty account, which is the admin that will, in my name, perform all the operations. And the other resource we have is a Gardener GCP cluster, shoot cluster. Usual specification, name of the cluster, region, some subnetting for Gardener. This is something we will not go in detail, Kubernetes version, type of machine, and so on and so on. So basically, to run this, the first thing I need to do is to run Terraform init. So it can basically generate the Terraform files and the state files and check that I have the plugins necessary to run this. So once Terraform init is run, we can see that everything's fine. Cool. Let's check the plan. And the plan is telling us everything. It did a dry run, a test run, and it's telling us, okay, I am going to create these resource. And that is going to be what we're going to do when we do Terraform apply, which does basically the same thing, but it carries out the operation. So once again, it gives us a summary and asks for our confirmation. I say yes. Cluster created. Let's go back to Gardener and see if it's true. And here we are. We have a Kubernetes cluster in the region we specified, with the name we specified, Kubernetes version we specified. Once this creation is finished, we can ask for the access and we can start working with it. So that's it. That's all for the different provisioning options for the Kyma CLI. Thanks for watching, and I give back to you, Łukasz, I guess, unless there are some questions.
Thank you, Borja. Any questions from the audience?
One, two, three.
Actually, one question from my side, but because you showed now using Terraform directly, but I assume that later is going to be something like Kyma provision Gardener GCP or something like this?
Correct. So that's why I showed both things, because the first one was the integration of Terraform into the CLI, and the second one is a provider, a Terraform provider for Gardener. The provider, I used it with the Terraform CLI because it's easier to show, and because we don't have the integration yet into the CLI, but it will be exactly the same as the first one I showed, just for Gardener.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So if there are no questions, let's just summarize the meeting. Final 1 minute to ask questions. You sure? It's better to ask them now than on Slack. No?
Well, no, I do, yeah, if it's better to ask here, I was kind of getting at when's the Minikube side of things kicking in?
So the Minikube is supported as far as I know, right? It's
So that's already there, right? That's what I can already provision Minikube, and that's already used in Terraform, right?
So the Minikube provisioning is not using Terraform as of now, because it was the first thing we supported actually, and it's just creating Minikube locally by using the actual Minikube CLI.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So that's one of the things on the to-do, I guess, is it migrate over to Terraform, just to give you some consistency.
Yes. So in the end, the whole cluster creation layer should be completely abstracted for us and be completely based on Terraform for any provider. It should not matter.
Cool. That's it from me.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you. So thanks a lot. Let me summarize again. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. Next meeting in 2 weeks. Remember that you can always add your items to the agenda up front, especially if you want to have some expert in some specific fields that can come to the meeting and answer your detailed questions. We can always organize it, like get some nerd from a cave or something for you. We have many of those. So thanks again. Thanks to the presenters. See you and hear you next time.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Goodbye.